You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. I'm here to talk to you about the initiative for the Guardians of the Multiverse. And here to talk about that with me is John Mills.
Rolls off the tongue, really.
It does. It does. I should have practiced that more before we started recording.
Jeffrey Wright didn't. Why should you?
Actually, I was reading that Jeffrey Wright spent a lot of time researching the character of the Watcher and then the kind of voice that he would want to give, and he decided on he wanted this kind of almost Oxford professor type sound without necessarily a British accent, but that kind of like,
look,
you know.
I'll never knock Jeffrey Wright. No, I think he is one of the most talented actors out there right now.
I love him.
And I thought what was, well, you know what?
Wait, before,
why don't you introduce what we're talking about?
Of course, you know that you're listening to the bonus show here on TFM within the 602 Club, assembling Avengers. And, John, we've reached our first animated series for the MCU called What If? And in fact, this is actually season 1. They're going to be doing future seasons. So, but before we get into all that, huge thank you to everybody who's listening. We love that you are. Really appreciate it. Of course, make sure you're subscribed and you'll get the entire show, bonus shows and all, as soon as they drop. Hit us up on social media at the 602 Club or at the 602 Club TFM on Instagram. We'd love to talk to you there. That's just be great. And to have your follow. Of course, on whatever platform you're listening to the podcast, hit the subscribe button. And also, we would really appreciate it if you go to Patreon and support us there. Christy and I, in fact, just recorded and released on Patreon a special bonus episode, the VIP Room. You can only get that on Patreon if you want to hear our best and worst of 2022. That's the only place you could do it. So you got to go to patreon.com/TrekFM and become a part of the team here at TFM. And you can get bonus episodes just like that from us. You can also, of course, find us online at Trek.fm, Facebook at facebook.com/TheTrekFM, and you can join our listeners-only discussion group on Facebook called the Babel Conference and talk to listeners from all over the world about all of the different shows that we're doing here on the network. So, we're in the first animated series, John. And
yes,
before anything else, I actually wanted just to ask you about the idea of this being an animated series and about the animation, because in any animated movie or show, TV show or whatnot, the most important thing about it, one of the most important things about an animated series or movie is the animation itself. And
yes.
So, how did this work for you in this series? Did you like the animation style? Did you feel like the kind of like mimicking of like 2D animation, even though it's not really 2D, it's like 2.5D? Did it work? Did it feel like epic enough for you with what we're trying to do with this series?
Yeah, I just want to say, I know we'll get to the history of everything, but growing up, I was a big fan of stealing into my brother's comic book collection and reading the What If series. I was always a huge fan. I was one of the dorks in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 that when Stan Lee's cameo was him talking to the Watchers, I was cheering in the audience going, yes, finally, yes, they're there.
Oh, you're that dork. Okay.
I was heard all up and down the Eastern Seaboard. I was so dorky, it was unbelievable. But in terms of the animation style, I will freely admit it was something for me to get past. There is a place for all types of animation. This type of animation that looks like rotoscoped people is very interesting because it's flat while trying not to be flat. It's sort of like what I think it was Linklater did that experiment. He did a Scanner Darkly, and they had where they had the actual actors and then they scan them. It's almost like this halfway spot between what you do with blue box theaters like Episode 3 or Avatar, and then what you do with rotoscoping like they did with Snow White or Cinderella or something like that, right? And it's interesting, but it's not, there's just something that's too smooth about it in the computer era. I know that's a really weird thing because the still images are interesting to me, but when they start moving, it's almost like a reminder of the uncanny valley. And I don't like living in that valley, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I go back and forth on it. Like, I think it's fine, right? But I think I wanted it to be more than fine. And I think maybe this series is a little bit ruined for me because we've already seen Into the Spider-Verse, where you did a comic book film that's animated and you went all out in creating something that mimics the look of comic books, even from like the dot matrix look of the characters in some ways, and from the printers back in the day in like the 80s. Like there's, and before that. So there's just something about this, which it's fine. But I think to me, what it lacks is like, this might sound really harsh, but artistic integrity. Like it doesn't feel like a lot of thought was really put into the artwork itself in the way that, like, when I watch like the Clone Wars or the Bad Batch or something like that computer animation, like it looks like painstakingly created and it looks painted and it has an artistic feel, but this feels almost like AI animation instead of like something that, I don't know, has a more specialty feel to it. So I don't mean it to be overly harsh, but do you see what I'm saying though?
I get what you're saying. I know, and I'm struggling with you. Artistic integrity isn't like the right phrase, but I know what you're going for. No, but I mean, like, I know what you're going for there. Where, again, look, we both love Clone Wars. We'll listen to Aggressive Negotiations, find out how much at some point. But it really is one of those things where I want something that's stylized. Let's take something that follows a similar sort of style to this. Archer, the very funny spy spoof series that's been on FX for 3,000 years. H. John Benjamin does the voice of Archer. Aisha Taylor. You have all of these fantastic voice actors on there. And it's a very funny show, especially if you've ever watched a James Bond movie. That has a similar sort of heavy contour feel to it, but it commits to the cartooniness of it. This, I think, what we're both getting at maybe is that it's caught between the photorealistic world, that sort of, again, Avatar sort of attempt to make photorealistic stuff, and the Archer, we're going to embrace the comic bookiness of it stuff. Yeah. And I think that's what creates this weird sort of, it doesn't exist in a clear way. Right. And I think that maybe what you're hitting on here is that it feels like they did something with computers that would just be the quickest way to, and I know that's not the case. There's a team of dedicated people that worked on this. There have to be. But the movement and the structures, you know what? I'll go ahead and say this. The lighting sucked. Let's take The Bad Batch, which you and I both love. And regardless of what anybody thinks about that show, what do we rave about constantly? The light sourcing. It looks like film. Those characters don't look like they could walk off the screen. They don't look real. I can tell I'm watching a stylized cartoon, but the lighting in those scenes is breathtaking. And it's painstaking and it's artistic. What I lack with this is that editorial and design flair that I'll go ahead and own up to it. I've been spoiled by Lucasfilm Animation. And that's my measuring stick. And this didn't hit that. The lighting, if anything, seemed very profound. Like the shot choices, I didn't really see anything dynamic in them. I didn't see any focus pulls. I didn't see any sort of dynamic way to push this. You know what it is? Here. Doesn't feel like it pushed. It didn't try to push an envelope. It just tried to exist.
Well, yeah, I mean, because I think, you're making an interesting point with, when you have something like Clone Wars Bad Batch on one side, and you have Into the Spider-Verse on the other side, right? And you have these two different types of variations of ways in which you can go about things and creating something that I think looks unique and special and different. And I think, this lacks even some, put it this way, I want this to look better than a DC home video animated film that they put out, right? And and in many ways, that's kind of what this feels like. And, when this is part of the MCU and it's part of canon and all of those things and it's part of Phase 4, and the stories that they're telling here are where, cracking open the idea of the multiverse in a way that really helps people start to begin to grapple with that idea too, right after Loki. Like, I want this to have its own special feel, which, just in the animation, it just doesn't have that special feel to me. And that's just kind of what I was looking for coming into this series.
Well, when you touch on with the multiverse aspect of it, we'll get more into this, but I'll leave this little taste out there for you before you shift our gears. What if, as a comic book series, didn't care about tying them together? What made that comic book series a lot of fun was each month that it came out, it was just, if I were to look back as an adult and look on it, it was as if each month was a bunch of people got high in a room and somebody said,
right.
Hey, it'd be cool if like Captain America was really Spider-Man. And somebody was like, yeah, make that. And it's like, that's the spontaneity I'm looking for. And I think that this animation style and then other things, it lacks the spontaneity I was looking for in this. Mm-hmm. There are moments of it where I'm like, that's going to be the next one. Right. And then it wasn't the next one. I was like, oh, okay, that's fine.
So I think that's an important thing to talk about then, was the idea that, the classic, like you said, What If series doesn't connect. It doesn't have anything to do with one another. It really is just one-off stories that you were then, able to just have fun with. You pop in, you pop out, that's it, And this series, not only does it end up kind of coming together in the end, but it does for us, it gives us a taste of not only where we've been a little bit in the series with the multiverse, but also gives us a taste of kind of things that we're going to see in the future coming up, which is it kind of, we introduced Captain Carter, we introduced the idea of Doctor Strange, being super dangerous, and even Wanda the same way, and, which plays into what we saw. And so there are ways in which this is connecting to the larger MCU. It sounds like to me that's actually a hindrance to this show rather than a positive.
I think so. I would prefer, just for once, to just stop with the continuity crap. There, I said it. I went into this, and for anybody listening, we're still in the territory of most of this stuff. There's only going to be one thing we go in through Phase 4 where I've seen it before now. Going into this series, what I was hoping for, and I know somebody can always say, oh, well, you just let your expectations get in the way. I was hoping for just a week to week. Let's just have some fun. Let's just let our hair down. And I'm bald, so letting my hair down is very difficult. But like, let your hair down. Let's just chill out. Every episode is just, like I was saying with the series, it's just a crazy idea. And it's what's annoying to me about it as well is because of the way they go with it overall, I think compelled them to do things in such a way that made that final episode work, as opposed to just saying, for instance, let's talk about the one that everybody talked about for a while, I know, which was T'Challa becomes Star-Lord. All of a sudden, the Ravengers are good people, and he's made the universe a better place, and even Thanos doesn't have any interest in doing his thing, and Nebula's okay. Like, it's one of those things where that one choice wouldn't have affected all of that. It's more believable to say, oh, well, if Tony Stark isn't there, then the Avengers look completely different, and maybe Thanos could win, sort of thing, because the Avengers never coalesce around a leader. But it's just this, it feels like they bent every story toward that last episode, as opposed to just letting them be freeform insanity, which is what I was looking for.
Yeah, this is interesting because we're on opposite sides of the table, because I was thinking to myself in those first few episodes, like, okay, why am I watching this? Why does it matter? You know, like, and I may, you know, we've all been trained in Marvel to ask that question. Why does it matter? But I think the thing that I liked personally about the way in which this does connect is it has minor implications, I guess, across the board, but it was still its own thing. And to me, by it kind of telling its own contained story that doesn't really have connections outside necessarily. I mean, you know, there's little things here and there, but otherwise, like, one, they create this what if based off of all of the series so far. So they're playing within their own universe and pulling and creating stories based on that, which I thought was fun. But to me, the biggest strength is the fact that it all connects together and is cohesive. And to me, I felt like this might be some of the most inventive work the MCU has done in a long time, because they weren't having to be beholden to everything else, and they were just able to, like, ratchet it up to 12, the crazy aspect. You know? And so to me, that's what, like, and it kind of came together all on its own, and it didn't necessarily have to do with anything else. It's like, by the end, I was, like, really invested in it, because to me, there were episodes where I was watching them like, why are we doing this zombie episode? This is not enjoyable to me.
But see, the zombie episode, that's one of the ones where I'm like, yes, this is what I'm here for. Because they had a zombies comic book series that was fantastic. I was hoping they were going to introduce the way they did in that series. They wound up eating Galactus in the comic books. Yeah. And so imagine zombies with the power cosmic.
Right.
And it was like, that's insane. That's off the charts crazy. Right. Whereas this, there are those moments of off the chart crazy, but then they feel obliged to keep people moving forward so that they develop the characters in a certain way. I liked the Doctor Strange story.
Yeah, me too.
Even though my biggest complaint about the entire series is this, again, this is one man's opinion. Feel free to hate him for it. Where this would have been 15 or 20-minute episodes if I were the producer. I would have said, 37 minutes is asking a little much. 32 minutes is asking a little much. We can get this done in 15 to 20 minutes. There's nobody who's coming into this cold. Nobody was reading What If who wasn't already a Marvel Comics fan. Nobody's watching this show that hasn't watched the MCU already. let's take a Tales of the Jedi approach and just do. Sorry, I keep referencing Lucasfilm and Lucas Animation. Can't help myself. But seriously, let's just do 15, 20-minute episodes because it's less of an ask. And I honestly think I would have been more forgiving of the tie it together thing because I would have gotten there so much faster. And maybe that's a function of the fact that I watched it all at once. I binged it instead of watching. This was released weekly, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Because if it was released weekly, I get the 30 to 37-minute thing. Okay, that's although honestly, subtract 8 minutes for credits each week.
Yeah.
I kind of get that, but do you see what I'm saying?
No,
like,
I do.
I honestly think it works better that way.
I think you're 100% right. I did feel like some of the episodes could have been cut down for time specifically. Just that they felt a little bit long. I think one of those episodes was the zombie episode where I don't hate the episode and anything like that. And in fact, I ended up actually enjoying the way it played into the finale. I thought that was really funny when he, does the thing and he pours all the zombies out on, our Ultron god.
Ultron.
It's great. But I 100% agree with you. Some of them could have been shorter. And, like you, spending all this time in Lucasfilm Animation for all these years now, they are masters at creation of stories that have the exact right amount of time that is needed. And they've really honed that craft. And part of that is, and we've talked about many a times, aggressive negotiations and in the 602 Club, how George Lucas was such a violent editor, right? Like he just cut and cut and cut until he couldn't cut anymore because he was trying to make sure that everything worked pacing-wise and story-wise, and like it just everything was rocking and rolling the whole time. And I think this series could have benefited from that. But one of the things I felt like this series also was able to do was to take things that, if you look at our ratings, and you'll get them later, we both can't stand the Ultron movie. Age of Ultron's terrible.
So true.
But
this
series makes him so much cooler and scarier in the end, right? Like, so there were ways in which they were able, again, being able to take everything up to 12, I think allowed them to be able to create stories to which in some ways one-upped things that we actually saw in the MCU movies and created a story which was way more entertaining, Ultron being one of the prime examples there, and much more interesting. And so to me, that was one of the other huge pluses of this series.
I won't deny that's a plus. Seriously, I won't deny that's a plus. This is I couldn't say it any better. Yeah, that does work to the advantage. The thing is, I don't think you and I are so far apart. I know that you prefer the tie it together, connected sort of thing, and I'm more the free form. Let's get crazy. I don't care whether it comes together at the end guy. There are just certain things where it could have just worked. Yeah, to your point, cut it to the bone. Don't feel obliged to make it 30 minutes each week. Just, okay, this one's a 15-minute story. This one's a 20-minute story. This one's a 37. This one's a 45-minute story. Okay. I mean, I even think the finale, I was like, okay, yeah, I get the point. Let's keep moving. And I would have preferred it to keep moving. But I would be interested with you. What do you, if you were forced to pick the absolute high point of the series? Because I think this will give everybody an indication of like what worked and what didn't for everybody. If you had to pick a high point, like an episode where you're like, that's the one that if I'm going to rewatch, I'm looking forward to rewatching it. What is that one? What is that episode?
Well, in all honesty, I think the first episode of the series is fantastic. I loved the way they retold the story of Captain America with Peggy Carter. It helps that I already love that character anyway, so I'm very invested there, in the fact that you got Haley Atwell back to do the voice. To me, that created a story to which I was immediately going to love. It's already one of my favorite movies anyway, the original Captain America in the series. So to me, I think that one really sticks out. And I think the other one that did that for me was What If Ultron Won, which is episode 8. Then, of course, that leads into 9. And it just, that's the place where it's like they did something where they took a character I didn't really end up loving in the films at all and didn't like what they did with them, didn't like the movie that they were in, and created something to which I'm like, why didn't they do something more like this? Because this is amazing. And it makes this character like incredibly scary. And so, yeah, those two to me were real standouts and ones that I just absolutely gravitated towards. So what was it for you? What was the 1 or 2 episodes you're like, oh, I'd go back and watch that again?
Well, honestly, What If Zombies was really great, but so that's definitely in my top 2. But the top of it for me, honestly, was What If Doctor Strange lost his heart instead of his hands?
That was a great episode. Yep.
Because that was the self-contained one. That was true. Like, those are the two, if you ask me, the two truly self-contained ones, where one moment in time, and then it has that What If Doctor Strange lost his heart instead of his hands? You have that classic lesson. If you can't let go, you could destroy everything. It's the Darth Vader lesson of you have to be willing to just say, sometimes I can't win. And that's one of those things. And I thought it was, it stretches a little bit. This is one of the ones, like, conversely, it's one of the ones I thought could have been a couple of minutes shorter, but
yeah.
It was interesting to me because I get that. It's an emotional beat that makes sense and is interesting to explore every time. How is this going to turn out?
Well,
but then yeah, go on.
In all honesty, that is one of those too that is really going to play into what comes up when you get to the Multiverse of Madness. And I think it would have been interesting for me to have seen this episode before I saw that movie, because I think I would have had more fear about what Doctor Strange might do in that film than I did going in, because this allows you to see some very important things beforehand that make some of the conversations even that happen in that film. I'm being very vague. John hasn't seen that movie yet, and I don't want to ruin anything there for him.
I have not.
So, but people will know what I'm talking about that have seen it, and I think it makes those mean a lot more. And so, yeah, I agree with you that really was a phenomenal episode. And I do think as well, that's one of the few episodes too that has almost every single original voice in it. And I think that made it, I mean, the fact that they got Tilda Swinton back and Rachel McAdams was a shocker to me. But, Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One is legitimately one of my favorite characters in the MCU because of the way she played it. And she's just so good in that role. And I felt like that was maybe that episode and the first episode are the ones where I felt like the characterization and the characters felt more real to the characters that we'd seen in live action. Which was pretty phenomenal.
Now, let me say as well that what will make you giggle is what I thought really worked about What If Zombies. What made that work was it seemed like a Zack Snyder spin on zombies. I mean, and again, it comes from the comic books that they did and everything, where it's like, it's not just the mindless shambler sort of thing. It's the Tony Stark has the Iron Man armor and he's a zombie and he wants to eat people and he has just enough intelligence left to use the Iron Man armor to do it. That's a horrifying concept. That's unsettling in the extreme. But let me throw this out. What is the least favorite episode of these 9 episodes? What is the one where, even though it might quote unquote tie into the ending, you say it could have been 8 episodes? They could have cut this and I wouldn't have even cared.
It's the Thor episode. That one was like all the Thor movies, especially the last 2. The last 2 specifically. It's fine. It's aggressively fine in the most fine that you can be. And I was kind of bored with it. And that's absolutely an episode that it goes on too long.
Oh, yes.
Mainly because the continued fights between Carol Danvers and Thor, it's like, okay, we get the point. Let's speed this up. And I just felt like that episode could have been edited down to be a 20-minute episode. If they needed it. I think it could have been
a 12-minute episode. I agree with you. That one was the one where I started disconnecting, where I just said, if anything, I think it makes What If Ultron 1 more interesting, because you come off of that Thor Were an Only Child one and you come into What If Ultron 1, and just the title, you say, oh, okay, we're being serious again. Okay, cool. We're telling a story here, because that Thor Were an Only Child one, that is Stranger Things season 2, the episode where she goes off with the other kids.
Yes.
Where you're like, oh my God, you could even just cut this thing and just like, nobody even talks about that episode anymore because they just don't even care.
That episode legitimized us talking about Howard the Duck, because he was featured prominently in that episode, and he married Darcy, which is hysterical.
Yes, although he did make an appearance in What If T'Challa Became a Star-Lord. So
I know, but I was just like, okay, the one redeeming value of this episode is the fact that Howard the Duck is so prominently in it, and that he marries Darcy, which shows that he, Howard's always got a thing for human chicks.
So there you go. You heard it here first. Matt is now elevating Howard the Duck to his top third of the MCU movies.
No, I just said it legitimized us talking about it.
No take backs. No take backs. You just said it. That's what I heard. That's what I insist. My runner up for least favorite episode, in all honesty, and it pains me to say this, is What If T'Challa Became a Star-Lord? Because it's one thing for it to be a butterfly effect where it's like, oh, the end of that one was the most interesting part, where Ego shows up and Peter is not who he is. He's not Star-Lord. He's just a guy working at a fast food joint. And that's the best cliffhanger, because that's the one where the Watcher says, with serious implications. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's right. If Peter wasn't equipped to stand up to Ego the way that he did, oh geez, yeah, we all would have been done. Mm-hmm. That would have undone everything. And so in a sense, that's almost the more interesting. But I just didn't like the fact that simply making T'Challa Star-Lord, all of a sudden everybody was sunshine and rainbows and sugar cookies. And it's like, no. Yeah. Thanos wouldn't stop being Thanos because of that. He wouldn't care. It doesn't make any sense. But that's just me.
Well, yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And, I think one of the things that was special about the series, though, and even though I didn't personally love that episode, it was so great to hear Chadwick Boseman again.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, especially now. And it just, even in that role, and even in what he does in later episodes, he just has such a heart and soul for that character. Like, it just reminded me how much I miss his presence in the MCU, because he has such a presence even in animation. And so whether or not I loved the episode that they starred with him in, I did love that he was back in this series. And, I liked how he was able then to be a part of what happened later on. And so that part was definitely a special thing.
I agree with you. Hearing Chadwick Boseman he was a great actor. He inhabited a role, and he played it really well, and he owned it. And it's that's a what if story in the real world that I would love is what if Chadwick Boseman were still with us? I'd love to see what he does with his career. That would have been really, really interesting. And I agree with you. He brings a presence. I think probably the thing that makes me put distance between myself and that episode is Thanos. If they got greedy with that episode.
I agree. Having
Thanos be a decent dude as a result, that's where I disconnect. I was with it up until that point where I was like, I even love the fact that whether they intended it or not, that they made the most brilliant Blazing Saddles level commentary on the idiocy of racism when the Ravagers abduct T'Challa and Yondu says, this isn't even the right kid. And I always forget his name. The Sean Gunn character says, what are you talking about? 2 eye holes, 2 ear holes, a mouth hole. It's the same. Every human looks the same. Like, I enjoy moments like that specifically because whether they intend to or not, it demonstrates the fact that, to an alien species, they wouldn't see any racial differences between us. They'd see us and they'd be like, what? It's a human. What difference is there between them? And that's actually a really important sort of thing to put out there. Just very casually throw out there. Say, humans are humans. What are you talking about?
I think the thing that worked for me the most in this series, and I kind of mentioned it before, but this was one of the most inventive things that the MCU has done in a long time, especially as we've been kind of working through this phase 4 where so much of it is honestly felt tired, I think. And this just felt like, because they didn't have to play in the same sandbox, really, they were able to create something that was truly fun and truly interesting in a way that a lot of the MCU hasn't been since the end of phase 3 for me. And so that's the thing that really stood out to me with this, is that just because it really truly felt like the MCU was doing something interesting again.
Yes. Let's just go ahead and embrace it. I did not dislike the series because of the last episode. I did not even dislike the last episode. But just having the compulsion to tie it all together, I think, is the biggest earmark of this being an MCU series. That they can't just tell stories. They have to find a way to turn it all into a post-credits sequence.
Yeah.
And that's the thing where I'm like, okay, guys, couldn't we just this once? Mm-hmm. Couldn't we just relax about that? Just have it be some fun stuff we talk about.
So you're saying, let it be? Let it be?
Yeah, words of wisdom. Let it be. Yeah.
So I'm interested then. It's a short series. They're short episodes, and this one will be short too. So I'm fascinated to see kind of where you land then with the ratings for What If.
It's tough. The joke that I have been making is it shouldn't have been called What If. It should have been called Who Cares. But that's just me being a comedian. I can recognize the fact that even though there are episodes where I look at them and I say to myself, there's no way this series is getting above 3 stars. I then think about just how much I enjoyed What If Doctor Strange lost his heart instead of his hands. I did enjoy What If Zombies, even though I thought it should have been drastically shorter. What if Killmonger rescued Tony Stark?
Mm-hmm.
That would have been an absolutely killer 16-minute episode. At its current runtime, it's a little indulgent. And I do like What If Ultron won, because that's something you have to wonder, and I think you give a great point where it makes the character interesting in a way that the movie could not, or did not, I should say. So I will wind up giving What If a 3.5, because at the very least, they did make me intrigued enough to say, what are they going to do next time? And so if they can just loosen themselves a little bit more, season 2 could be even better for me. And so this is one of the series where I say, okay, let's have a season 2. Let's see where this goes. Let's see what we can do. So that's where I am, 3.5. Yeah,
that's
what about
that's actually great. I thought you might actually just land at a 3. So the fact that, you went to 3.5 and mentioned that, this was intriguing enough to, have your attention for a, season 2 is really good for the series then. For me, the fact that it created its own little MCU universe outside the other MCU universe, but in this universe we can do the craziest things without having to worry about it, actually made me more interested in the series and like it so much more than some of the MCU universe outside the larger. And I really ended up enjoying this series a lot more than I thought I was going to. And I agree with your criticisms that I think almost every episode probably could have been shorter. Some of them maybe quite a bit shorter, and it would have made it possibly like a 5-star series. So I'm going to take a whole star away because I think that the editing here just needed to be better. But even with my frustration of the animation not being something astounding, I really enjoyed the storyline here. And I enjoyed the reinvention of the characters that they ended up pulling in. And I liked that, again, we kind of created this almost more interesting MCU at this point in Phase 4 than the larger. And so I give this 4 out of 5 stars because I ended up really enjoying it. And that leads me to another great question, John, which is, what is your ranking for the MCU?
It's difficult because in terms of ranking in the great order of the MCU, even more so than Loki, which I gave a pretty good rank to at the end of it. This is one that's more snackable. So in a sense where it rests in the order, I could see myself watching a 30-minute episode that I enjoyed a lot, going back to it and just saying, I just want to watch this again, just enjoy it. But does that mean it deserves to be ranked higher than certain things? Unfortunately, yeah, it does. And it's going to be weird. But I can honestly say that, okay, all right, Winter Soldier, will anything ever top it? Iron Man 3, Ant-Man, Guardians Volume 2, Iron Man, Avengers Endgame, Black Panther, Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, Loki, Captain America Civil War, Captain America the First Avenger, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and then I'm going to have to put What If before Leterrier's The Incredible Hulk.
Wow.
And Avengers Infinity War and Thor and blah, 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 blah. Because, you know what? No. This is where it gets tough. Because would I watch even a 30-minute episode before Infinity War? there's a certain point in Infinity War where it's like a Star Wars movie where if I start at a certain point, nothing's stopping it. So I'll actually go ahead and say that I'll put it after Infinity War. So it'll be Ant-Man and the Wasp, Incredible Hulk, Avengers, Infinity War, then What If, then Thor, then Spider-Man, Homecoming, then Avengers, then Howard the Duck, WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Spider-Man, Far From Home, Thor 2, Iron Man 2, Thor 3, Avengers Age of Ultron, Black Widow, and Captain Marvel. And I will note that for some reason, even though WandaVision, Loki, and Falcon and the Winter Soldier are available to put in my ranking on letterboxd.com, I can't put What If in here.
Oh, I found What If. You can put it in there. Yeah.
Oh, you did? What do I have to type in?
I had to put in the ... question mark. And
that's just dumb.
So anyway, you can find it. So it took me a while, but you can put it in there. So
well, thank you.
You're welcome. I was frustrated by that too today until I figured it out. So Winter Soldier, Iron Man 3, Civil War, Endgame, First Avenger, Black Panther, Guardians 2, Ant-Man, What If, Doctor Strange, Incredible Hulk, Homecoming, Guardians of the Galaxy, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Loki, Avengers, Far From Home, Infinity War, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Dark World, Iron Man 2, Thor, Howard the Duck, Black Widow, Age of Ultron, Captain Marvel, WandaVision, Ragnarok at the bottom. So, yeah, What If is pretty high up there. And what you said about it being, like, snackable, it's like I am much more, willing to kind of just go back and watch one of those 30-minute episodes than, I mean, even though I love Doctor Strange, like, I'm still more likely to watch parts of What If before that. So, and the same with, like,
there you go.
Incredible Hulk and everything after. So, yeah, it was a lot of fun, so I can't wait till we get to our next viewing for Assembling Avengers, which is the next two things are Shang-Chi and then the Eternals, because they're both films that's going to allow us to kind of have some closer episodes, because it doesn't take as much for us to have to go through, when you're having to watch, 9 to 10 episodes or more of a series. We got to have more time. We got other things going on. But you'll get some quicker episodes coming up as we hit Shang-Chi next. But, John, before we do that, where can people find you if they want to catch up with you?
Well, you can find me online as Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE, and you can find me over on the Nerd Party Network regularly, appearing on 2 shows, one of them called House Lights, where we look at the work of directors through different categories, decades, and different ways to look at their works. I co-host that with Tristan Riddell and Darren Moser. Delightful people who are wrong when they disagree with me. And you can find me on Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast that I co-host with you, one Mr. Matthew Rushing.
And, of course, I am all over social media under the name Matt Rushing02, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero. Find me here on the network, of course, in the main 602 Club show. I'm doing a bunch of other shows on the network as well. Literary Treks, about the books and the comics of Star Trek. Warp 5, about Star Trek Enterprise. The Orb, about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Saddle Up, about Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And The Artificial Tangos, we're going to be talking about Star Trek Picard Season 3 coming up, so you want to check that out. And over on the Nerd Party Network, when I'm not at Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, there is a completed show there called Owl Post. I did that with Drea Kaufman. And we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. But thank you so much for joining us.
Avengers!